Don't overload this computer. Easy there. I hear you winding up. Deep breath. Deep breath. Relax. Alrighty, so I ran some errands today. I took care of some banking. And I, on the off chance, stopped at a Goodwill that does sometimes have some refurbished electronics. Picked up a new small internal hard drive for the laptop for $5. Sounded like a great deal. Brought it back. Looked very similar to the one that broke. Plugged it in, and turns out it's like 2 millimeters too thick, so it doesn't really work. Tried to run it up anyway and spent a couple hours trying to reinitialize it in some way, and it still doesn't want to recognize it. So I don't know if that's drive. I know I plugged in the hard drive for one of my other laptops. So I had the hard drive from one of my old laptops, plugged it into the newer one with a busted drive, and it worked. I've not had any problem with it loading the desktop in other ones. But it didn't work with the one I got today. So I'm super anxious about the one that's coming in Amazon, from Amazon. Because I'm spending $40-50 on a hard drive. That's the same model and make that's in that laptop. It should work. All the details I have suggest that this should do what it's supposed to do. It should function as a laptop. I don't know. I don't know if it'll work or not. Now I'm nervous. I'm super nervous. Like I got my hopes up, and I think that was the error. I should not have gotten my hopes up. I should not have started to anticipate that I could potentially get that laptop running again. So I have the order that I placed for the hard drive replacement for laptop. It's an exact model number for the one that's in there now that broke. It should work. I just have to put an operating system on it. Now, theoretically, I do have a thumb drive for recovery for the operating system. Just the operating system. It won't recover anything that I've lost in the crash. So I might be able to get Windows up on it. I don't know for sure. But that's contingent on it working. And I have mixed results as to whether or not the hard drive will work. So I'm a little nervous about it. So basically, laptop A destroyed its hard drive. I unplugged from laptop B, an older model, its hard drive, plugged it into laptop A, and it loaded all the way to desktop, but wouldn't recognize the keyboard or mouse. So I shut it down, removed the hard drive, put it back into laptop B. I ran my errands today and stopped into a Goodwill where they had a 320 gigabyte hard drive for a laptop computer that looked about right. Well, it was about $5. So I purchased it, brought it back here, inserted it into laptop A, and couldn't get it to recognize it. But I booted from a thumb drive that was the recovery drive. and use that to restore. I clicked the restore hard drive function, and it took 2 hours to do what it's supposed to do. Came back and said was unable to do it, and I couldn't get access to a desktop or a hard drive. So I don't know if that was just the model of hard drive or not. It also was a little too thick for the case that helped mount it in place, but it still fit within the cavity well enough that I was able to just hold it in there. And I did take a look at it, and it did have it should be an empty, unformatted, no operating system hard drive. But it does, this on the front of it does have a picture of a Macintosh Apple on it. So I'm wondering if it's just not compatible. So I'm going to return it. It's $5. It's not a big deal. But earlier, either yesterday or earlier today, I finally placed the order for a replacement hard drive, which is the exact same make, model, and details as the model of hard drive that burnt out for Model A laptop. So it should theoretically work. I hope it works because I spent freaking $40 on it. But at any rate, it's going to be a little while before it gets here for me to try it out. I'm going to see if I can try the restore Windows to it. To see if I can get that up and running on a Windows format. If I can't, I can't. And I will see if I can convert it over to Linux. And in the meantime, around the same time, I also ordered the desktop computer, which should theoretically work with this monitor and offer all the capabilities I need. With that said, I'm going to have to spend a little time over the next couple weeks while it gets here, seeing if I can reorganize this room in a way that I can set up a desktop that I can use for not only using the computer, but also top-down recording for projects. I don't know if I'll be able to get that worked out in the time that I need to, but hopefully we'll have something more than what I have here now for computing when the time comes. In the meantime, I have been trying to recover some of the things I had been working on. It's hard for me to really get a sense of where I'm at. There are certain projects where I'm like, oh God, I can't do that because I don't have those pieces anymore. And I'm so used to being able to work on something until I can't do something, flip over to another project that I can do stuff on until I'm able to do work on the finishing up the other piece. But so many pieces are missing right now. So many pieces. It's going to take me a little while to get over this, I think. But so many plans have to be reevaluated. And I will say, it's been interesting with my minimal access to the internet of lately, that I think it's sort of like it's given me a false sense of comfort. And the reason I say that is I haven't had an argument with anybody online about protests or political campaigns, or the coming up election, or the pandemic, or conspiracy theories about the pandemic, or any of that crap going on anywhere in the world. And I've not had any of that feed coming to me. And so it's just sort of kind of like, it almost feels like the world got back to normal while I was away. And I was like, oh, cool. But then they're just, every now and then there are little hints and like, no, this is still very different. And there's still some very interesting things going on in the world. But it's not been overpowering. And I'm hoping to a certain degree that is the world maybe healing a little bit. But I'm worried that it's the world becoming desensitized and not actually getting better. Like, we just got over like, somebody said like a week ago, something to the effect of, it's interesting how certain people have just decided they didn't want to deal with COVID anymore, so it wasn't an issue, so they stopped caring. And like, it's very telling. It's a couple people have said like white people did that. Some people have said, interesting how America just decided they didn't want to deal with it anymore, so it doesn't exist anymore. Those are people from other countries who were saying that one. And to a certain degree, it's true. You get a lot of people who just like, I'm tired of dealing with this, so it's not a real problem anymore. It's a very American lifestyle. And you can kind of see that kind of mindset in a lot of the public right now. And I wonder if that's, a sign of what's going on, or maybe we're through the worst of it and it's getting better. I don't know. And I'm a little anxious to hope for either of them, because there are definitely certain things I would rather see be the case. But there's also the sheer number of people who acted like idiots during portions of the last month and a half, and the consequences of those actions. I think we still have yet to see them hit. And so there's a part of me is like, I should be more anxious than I am. But I have to admit, being disconnected for a few days, I'm less anxious than I was. It seems to suggest to me that my beloved internet can be a very toxic place. So there's a lot of hope, a lot of confusion, and a lot of testing my patience right now. I did finally get some banking done, which was nice. But I don't know. I don't know. I've still got to do some things tomorrow. I've been doing some major overhauls on the campaign world that I was doing, partly just because I've lost some of the things I was working on, and now I'm just starting over on them, and they're coming out differently when I'm working on them this time, which is an interesting statement on some of these projects. It's like one of the things I've always said when working on, especially like the rewriting story or movie ideas, is that any two authors, any two directors, any two creators of gaming stuff who are given the same blocks to build from will build very different castles. If you gave any of my writing prompts from any of the things that I read over the years and left prompts on my channel to 5 different writers, you will get 5 different stories. And so it's sort of funny to see that pattern bear out even with me, where I built an entire universe or a multiverse in a certain point of view with intricately locking components, and a theme running through it. And the moment you take all of that away and scrap it and ask me to recreate it, I create it again. But it's like a cousin of the first one. It's not the same thing. And so I find that like a very interesting consequence of all of this. I kind of want to go back and watch that video where I brainstormed out all those novel ideas or story ideas from movie rewrites. I kind of want to dig through that again, just because I'm sort of hitting a hurdle point again in the redesign of my campaign setting. Part of it is just that some of the new arrangements require some careful thought about the consequences of the directions I'm going. So one of the things I've been, I should stop fiddling with things while I'm on shooting videos, because I keep dropping them underneath the chair. But I could see if I can grab that notebook, and I'll go over some of the things that are slightly different. Well, I shouldn't say slightly, they're substantially different. That's part of what's so fascinating for me. So early on in the creation of the original version of the Empyrean Realm, I had predominantly focused on a sort of a triptych of categories of races. So we had the Nomoid, the Borean, which is the sort of like the savage races, and then the mythic races, which would include giants and dragons. And some of the relationships between them were sort of a little vague, but with a sense of an idea of where things were going. And then there was in the Nomoid group, there were half-breeds. So you had gnomes and fae and dwarves and humans. And the gnomes and the fae had the holder. The fae and the dwarves had the alfar. And the dwarves and the humans had half dwarves. And the gnomes and the humans had halflings. The fae and the humans had half elves. And the dwarves and the gnomes had the Ludek, Krasna Ludek, which was the good little people. And those were really where I had established things. I had the kobolds, trolls, the avians, and I believe it was like this doppelgangers, or the fetch was the fourth category in that group. And they had some half-breeds between them, but they were a little less defined and certain. And then the dragons, giants, and the rock, and what was the other one I had? Because they've changed. I've changed those. And they didn't have half-breeds established yet. I hadn't figured that part out for them. And that was really sort of all I had. I had the created species, like the Scathari, which were the beetle umberhulks. And I had the beast people, which were the creations of the gnomes. But since then, taking a real hard look at it and thinking about its patterns from the beginning, I started to really rethink some of those categories. And what I did was backtrack a little bit to some of the concepts I had for some of these. So I started with, I want there to be 4 categories, not 3. And the 4 categories should be not including the created species. So the created species really started with just the Scathari, the Umber Hulk beetle folk. Technically, when I built out the story around the Fae and their tendency to harvest and graft in new organs and whatnot to themselves, I also created them to be involved with creating flesh golems, Frankenstein's monster, essentially. And those beings, those created beings, are sort of the Fae version of what the gnomes do with the beetles when they make the beetles. The Scathari beetle folk technically would be a creation of the gnomes, and the gnomes, when I built the backstory for the gnomes, they also create satyrs and minotaurs. Basically, they sort of Island of Dr. Moreau have altered existing creatures to become humanoid creatures. And the Scathari, the beetle folk, are just one of a set of those. So I started to say, like, Scathari and beast folk, like the satyrs and the minotaurs and the mermaids and whatnot, are the created people that the gnomes create. If that's the case, then the flesh golems are the created people that the elves create or the Fae create. With that in mind, I started really thinking a little while back that humans also create beings via summoning spirits to become familiars. And so they are I gave them the responsibility of the Mongili, or the daemon, or angeli, which is angels. So angels and demons are sort of like the angels and demons that sit on your shoulder and that old cliche trope. But in this case, they're actually created beings that are sort of like servants to humans who know how or have the technique to create them. And then so you have the beast men, including the Scathari, the flesh golems, and the Mongili. Well, that's the gnomes, elves, and humans. There's only one other main category of gnomoid race, and what do they create? Well, they're sort of the reason there are as many half-breeds as there are. They've sort of mastered the technique of breeding other races together. So I sort of started to build a list of, like, for them, the important ones would be the half-giants. Previously, I had the half-giants be a consequence of the giants in their own category. So giants are a mythic race. They're one of the 4 categories of, like, you have the gnomoids, the boreans, the mythics, and in the mythics category are the dragons and the giants and another 2 classifications. And I had underneath of them, as a half-breed of giant, half-giants. But the way I had built them, they were either going to have to be a half-breed of giants with Fae or a half-breed of giants with humans, which is not what the half-breeds are. The half-breeds are between people of the same category. So it would have to be dragons and giants would produce something, but that's not going to produce the half-giants that I wasn't envisioning. And so I started to ask the question of, like, okay, so within a category, within the gnomoid category, you have the 4 primary races, and the half-breeds between them. Within the Boreans, you have the 4 races within the Borean category, and each one of them has half-breeds within them. But there aren't crossbreeds between a troll and a dwarf. They're 2 different tiers. They're 2 different subsets. Unless that's what I make the dwarves do. So where the elves craft dead tissues carved off of living beings into living puppets that they can control and use, and where the gnomes vivisect and rebuild living creatures into new creatures, the dwarves breed new things together. And so that was sort of one of the side steps that I took. So the dwarves are going to be, I built a 12 category long group of breeding projects. Now, I don't want them to have just this slew, this menagerie of things that they've bred together. But I do want it to feel like it's not a systemic, like they're not puppy mills where you have purebred ogres or something like that. This is more along the lines of with the right knowledge and the right resources, a custom-made life form can be made by breeding 2 creatures together to get you something of use. And so there may be all of these 12 at different points, but it's sort of like a custom crafted tool. Somebody made this specifically to your requirements, your specifications. So, somebody crossbreeding any of the races with a dragon might get you sort of like a science fiction version of what dinosaurs would have evolved into if they'd evolved into people. So I think there's a Doctor Who has a character that's basically what dinosaurs would have evolved into if they'd evolved into people character. Lady Vasha or something like that. And then, there's something, take the idea of a dryad and cross it with a dwarf. Dwarves are notoriously cave dwellers, and most of their plant products are relatives of mushrooms in some of those mythologies. So if you took a notoriously plant-based creature like a dryad, which is a bonding of a fey creature and a tree, if you did the equivalent for a dwarf, it would be a mushroom people, which, now that I think of it, sounds an awful lot like the Mario Kingdom. And so that's just some of the stuff I was playing around with. So that 4 categories of created beings is sort of a new development of what I've been playing around with. But I've also been playing around with the fact that those categories themselves have changed. I started taking a real hard look at what I wanted the results of them to be. And so the 4 categories are going to be the 4 gnomoid races, so humans and the relatively classical fantasy elves, dwarves, and gnomes, and taking those 4 and their half-breeds as one category. The next one would be the slightly more monstrous, where you have the trolls and the kobolds, and I had a couple of other things in there, but I've changed them up. So now I've got 2 more in those categories that are different. I'll get back to those. And then the mythic level was giants, dragons, and then I changed again 2 more of those. It used to be dragons, giants, rock, which were the giant birds, And what was the other one I used to do? I sort of lost track of it. I remembered them enough to write them down. So I had the mythics were dragons, rocks, giants, and the slime. The Boreans were trolls, kobolds, avians, and fetch or doppelgangers. And then the gnomoids are the same. There's a fourth category that I've put in there that I call the primordials. And those are plants, animals, elementals, and the fourth one took me a little while to get right because there should be four, but it's that grouping is structured around: is it plant, is it animal, is it mineral, is it vegetable, is it animal, vegetable, or mineral is the classic question. And that's a three-part, but this has to be a set of four. And there's some things that don't quite fit those categories. And I'm like, so what is it? And I got to thinking, like, okay, so, you know, the elements are earth, air, fire, water, and any derivatives from those. Plants are any growing thing with roots of some kind. And animals are pretty straightforward as animals. So what else is there? And I got to thinking, like, you know, spirits? Could you do something like a abstraction, like a spirit of a place, or my car as distinct from just a car? What makes it distinctly it instead of something else? And I was like playing with that a little bit, and then I got to thinking about the each of these are a strata into which a spirit can be placed. So if you were to take a human spirit and put it inside of a wolf, it would still be in the form of a wolf, but with human intelligence. It's one of those parts of the story that I want to be a certain way. And so I got to thinking, like, it's more about the matter, the form, the shape of a thing. And then I got to thinking, like, what's the other category of stuff? And to me, that was really more along the lines of incorporeal things, you know, and some of that was like ghosts and specters. And I did a little research and I went back through thinking about some of it as like the research on some of the seances and spiritualism of the early 1900s, late 1800s. And one of the things that comes up is ectoplasm. So it's not an animal. It's not a plant. It's not earth, air, fire, or water. It's not even either, which is the mysterious fifth element in some cases. It's a tactile substance that is not any of those things, but is a consequence of intangible forces, powers, and mysterious forces in the universe. I went, all right, I can kind of see that. So I class that as the fourth category in the primordial elements. And what I did from those points on was really take a look at relating each of those four tiers to each other in a similar fashion. So in a certain sense, it's like if you were to take a look at plants on the primordial level, on the mythic level, underneath plants on the grid would be Dryads, which is a fey creature that is bonded to plants in a specific way. And then underneath of that one would be something that shares those themes. And then underneath that would be the gnomoid race that meshes with that the most. And so I literally have animals, Sphinx, which is one of the new ones I slotted into the mythic level, then Puka, which is Puck, or a sort of a fey creature known to assume or be seen often as part animal, part little person. And that fit really well with the category of the gnomes. And it fits really well with the Sphinx because the Sphinx is human and animal combined. And it's a very chimerical creature. It has eagle wings, a lion's body, and the head of a human being. Androsphinx are male, Gynosphinx are female. Apparently, there are a couple other types of Sphinx out there, too. There's a ram-headed Sphinx and a falcon-headed Sphinx. And the falcon-headed Sphinx sounds an awful lot like a griffin to me. So I'm going to equate them just because it works for where I'm going with that. So you have this animal category with a tendency to have the races in that category, vertical category, have some animalistic additions to themselves. So animals, Sphinx, Puka, which are oftentimes like fox or a raccoon, people. And then gnomes, which in my story are the ones that can combine and do Island of Dr. Moreau kind of stuff, and are notorious for taking on certain animal traits like a mouse tail or stuff like that. And so I'm like, yeah, that all kind of works reasonably well. And then the next category over was the plants, Dryads, and I have it down here as sort of hags, like swamp hags and stuff like that. And then underneath that is the fae, the Anlang fae. So the forest dwelling, symbiotic with nature, living in trees, elves from Tolkien, but with a little bit more of the Fern Gully fairies aspect to them, with a little bit of gothic culture to it. And so you have this sort of the trees within the trees, part of nature kind of theme running through it, even to its darker intents and flavors. Next over would be the elements, which is earth, air, fire, water, and then you have things like dragons that can breathe fire and ice and things like that. And underneath that, you have the kobolds, which are sort of like a reptilian goblinoid. And then underneath that, you have the dwarves, which is a little bit of a rough stretch. Kobolds are usually referred to as a type of dwarf that lives within mines. But the other aspect of it is dwarves mesh really well with the elements, partly because they are a stone-dwelling, cave-dwelling, mountain-dwelling, hardy person or people that forge metal and fire, live in stone. So they are very elemental in that sense. And the dwarves, as I was writing them for the setting, also tend to, as they age out of their bodies, replace it with stone. And so the elders, the great old ones of the dwarven population, are nearly almost completely stone golems, with the spirit of the original dwarf living and residing within it. So they're very elemental. And then the fourth category was the ectoplasmic, which is a bit of a stretch to make it fit with the idea of the giants, which is their mythic category. And from the giants, you have trolls. Those two pair well together. The giants and the trolls being sort of like a cousin of the giants. And then underneath of that, humans. We are very much, especially when you consider the idea of having fairies, gnomes, and dwarves as sometimes little people, and we are big compared to they are. And so you have your possibility of having humans seems still sort of like a giant race. And they are sort of nasty and brutish in comparison to the intellectual and high-minded elves, or the curious and studious gnomes, and the industrious and stolid dwarves. We're short-lived, nasty, brutish creatures in regards to how the others might see us. And so we kind of fit with the model of the troll and the giant. That ectoplasmic category is still sort of like the odd one up in that corner, but I think the way I'm using it is more in reference to the fact that humans are going to be one of the most varied races. We're going to have multiple ethnic groups, lifestyles, languages. We're going to live in different regions and have different cultural aspects to us. The trolls are going to be various as they are oftentimes in mythology, where they could be as small as a large skunk to as big as a house. And trolls, different tribes of trolls, they're different. Some have ram's horns and sharp tusks underneath of their jaws. Some of them just have big, long noses and small humanoid faces. Some of them are giant-eared with bulbous noses and long beards, and some of them aren't. And trolls are very varied like that. So it sort of fits that we're cousins to them. And the giants can likewise be varied and different. And the ectoplasm as a formless mass of ooze that can harbor and grow a spirit of some kind of life within it, has a mutable form. It can be anything. It can become anything. So I guess that variability is the deciding factor for that. I think the hurdle I'm hitting right now is deciding whether or not I want the 4 first mothers to be on the vertical or the horizontal rowing. So do I want it to be the first mother, Olean, perhaps, is the mother of gnomes, fae, dwarves, and humans? Or do I want Olean to be the mother of animals, sphinxes, pukas, and gnomes? I don't know which way to set that up. And partly because I want in the story to have the races be wrong about it. I want them to build around this philosophy of thinking of, either, all the gnomoid races are derived from one of the great mothers, the first mothers, only to find out that no, the fae who imagine themselves to be kindred from the same mother as gnomes and dwarves are in fact kindred of hags, dryads, and plants. Or I want them to imagine that the great mother, the first mother of animals, sphinxes, pukas, and gnomes, was different from plants, dryads, hags, and fae, and that in fact, no, we are all from the same one. And so I'm not sure which works best for where I'm going. And I think that's going to come down to just processing out a little bit more of the setting and getting a sense of, as the story unfolds for the players or the readers, what is the more impactful message to come across, learning that you've been mistaken the whole time? Is it that you also have monsters within your family tree? Or is it that the people you thought were so different are really your brothers and sisters? I don't know. I think it really depends on the story I'm telling at a given time. So I got to play with that a little bit. It's been interesting to play with those elements a bit. But it's sort of like, I feel like there were some good things in the old one. And I remember many of them. I don't remember all of them. And I hope I'm not losing anything good by doing what I'm doing, rebuilding it now. But even if I am, there's not much I can do about it now. Kind of has to go this way. So that's what I'm doing. And I guess that's where I'm going to call it tonight. We're 45 minutes in. I wasn't planning on running that long tonight. I almost wanted to back out at 10 minutes and just say, well, that's sort of the update of the computer stuff. But I'm going to play with this a little bit more. And I have to build that fourth setting because we have Olean, Syrah, and what's the other one? Ort. I might call it Orta. Those are the three of the four great mothers, the first mothers. I know that Dunya is the name I'm going to use for the fourth. I don't know which setting. And this is one of those moments where I kind of lament what I lost. Because in the early days of building this setting, I had a list of 12 different subsettings that I could add. There was a superhero themed one, there was the Medusa themed one, and there was the plague themed one. And then there were, I think, 9 others. And I know a few of them. I remember a few of them. There was one where it was going to be the Cyclops and Satyrs. And then there was going to be the Cast in Stone, which are 2 story ideas I had for novels to write at one point. But those, I don't feel like those fit as well for what I'm doing here as they did for their own novels. So I'd like to leave those aside for right now. I might think about the Satyrs and Cyclops one because it can be adjusted to fit well. But I'm trying to remember some of the other ones I built up on that list, and I can't remember it. I can't remember all 12. And there were some interesting opportunities there to explore for a fourth setting. It was difficult to weed it down to the 3 that I weeded it down to. So there were other options that I would likely go for really well. And I think they're lost. I don't recall early on if I listed it in one of my videos. I may have to go back and see if I can backtrack. Otherwise, I may just sit down and brainstorm out a whole new list and just winnow it down to find the new winner. But yeah, moving up towards 50 minutes, and I need to get ready for bed. I got stuff I need to do tomorrow too, so we're gonna have a night of it. I will catch you. I will try to be back on tomorrow. I don't know if I'll have a lot to report, but we'll find out. Okay, until then. Oh, let's see what we got in cut and paste today. Nothing? I have to have had something in there. Oh, I guess the cut and paste is empty today. I don't know how that's the case. That seems weird to me. I haven't shut this off since frickin' February. There should be something in there. All right. Good night. Take care. And stay safe. There we go.